you, just point blank, what the fundamental moral code of Christianity is, this passage might be the thing you think of. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Jesus is always going on and on about loving our enemy, about forgiveness, about reconciliation. It's something that is clearly important to him. It's something that's clearly important to living a good life, a life in abundance. Well, every time I read that, I think, that's great, Jesus, but how am I going to do that? It's one thing to say, love your enemies and forgive those who have done you wrong. It's an entirely another thing to do it, is it not? So I find it really helpful that this morning in our lectionary, we have the story of Joseph to guide us a bit in what forgiveness might mean. For those of us who are in the 9 o'clock Friday Bible study, we've been reading together the book of Genesis for the last several weeks, and we're just about to come to the story of Joseph. So to the lectionary writers, I say, thank you, good job. If you haven't read the story of Joseph for a while, or if you haven't watched Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in a little bit, let me remind you of the story. Let's get everybody up to speed. Joseph is the 11th out of 12 brothers, the sons of Jacob. Jacob, who had the two wives, Rachel and Leah. Rachel, the wife he loved. Leah, the wife that he accepted. And Joseph had all these dreams as a child and as a young man that he would one day rule over all the other brothers, all but one, I might add, who were older than him, probably bigger than him, and felt that they had more of a claim to the blessing of their father and of the nation. And Joseph is the father's favorite, the favorite son of the favorite wife. And I don't know about your families, but with the 5 kids in my family, sibling rivalry, I'm here to tell you, is real. And one kid crowing over the other that they are mom's favorite or dad's favorite and showing off their the material item that proves that favoritism, that was never going to go down well at my house. I don't know about yours, and it didn't go down well at Joseph's house either. His brothers were so angry, so jealous, so envious of their father's love, so envious of this smarmy kid who is their brother, that they wanted to kill him. And they actually dialed it down a little bit when it was decided that instead of murdering him outright, they would just throw him into a pit. And then one of the older brothers thought, you know what, let's sell this guy into slavery. And he was out of there. And thus, Joseph's life began. From dreams of ruling and father's favoritism, to the pit, to slavery. Now, Joseph's story rolls out in some really amazing ways, and if you're interested in learning more, you're always welcome to come to the 9 o'clock Friday Bible study. But what happens ultimately is that Joseph, through his own talent and cunning, becomes number 2 after the Pharaoh of Egypt. In the ancient world, the Pharaoh of Egypt was the most important and significant and wealthiest ruler of all of that region. And he was number 2, an Israelite. Imagine that. So when there's a famine that strikes Israel, it is his brothers who are forced to crawl to Egypt to ask for food and sustenance. And when they meet the number 2 guy in the land, they don't realize that it's their own brother. They don't know that this is the same one that they threw into a pit. That's where we start today. That's the backstory to where we begin. So what does this have to do with forgiveness? This morning I want to talk about 4 of the properties of forgiveness, 4 of the things that make up forgiveness. What is it? What it isn't? How it works? And why we should do it. And I'm borrowing a lot of this from the Reverend Rupp. He is an Episcopal priest and a psychologist who's done a lot of work on what he calls appreciative inquiry. It's a way of looking at the totality of what is and seeing what good we can get from it. I find his work to be thoroughgoing and durable, It's sturdy and valuable. I don't think he has a wishy-washy idea about forgiveness, the same way that we don't have a wishy-washy idea about love. And so I want to share some of Dr. Boyle's insights with you and share them in the context of our story of Joseph and what Jesus has to say. First of all, let's start with why we need forgiveness. William Faulkner says that the past is never dead. It's not even past. And boy, is that true. The things that have hurt us in our lives, man, those things just feel like they are so present. I don't care if it was 10 minutes ago, last week, or 40 years ago. Some of those old hurts are right there in the front of us. When we hang on to those old hurts, which is inevitable, it's how we're built, that the old things just stay. And they build up this sort of hard shell of resentment. You know what resentment is, right? It's where you drink the poison and wait for the other guy to die. When the past is present, we are swimming in that resentment. And it has a way of coloring everything. So forgiveness is the process by which we put down the bottle of bleach and learn how to let go. Easier said than done, I know. So let's start with how we do that. Forgiveness, first of all, is releasing our current demand that the past and the people in it be any different than how they are and how they were. Releasing our current demand that the past be different. Let me explain. There is nothing we can do to change the past. We cannot undo anything that's happened in the past. Not even Jesus can undo the past. He can only move forward. The work of the cross and resurrection is not anything to change what happened before, but is being able to move forward. The first thing we have to do in the process of forgiveness is acknowledge that the past is never going to change. That the hurt that happened to our values, the hurt that happened to our bodies, cannot be undone. That's a fact. And actually, it's a hard fact. It seems logical to our brains, but to our hearts, it hurts. But what if instead of demanding that the past be different and holding on to that resentment, what if we say to ourselves, I prefer that the past would have been different? Try that language out in your own mind. I bet as soon as I talked about forgiveness, every one of us came up with an old hurt that feels like a wound that will never heal. I know I did. And right now I'm imagining and thinking of that hurt and thinking, man, I prefer that that didn't happen. I prefer that my parents didn't have an acrimonious divorce when I was 2. But it happened. There's no undoing it. You can't go back. I prefer that that would be different. Already, the demand on the past is let go of a little bit. And I feel kind of better. Secondly, forgiveness is not denial. When we are wounded, something has transgressed our values or our body. Our values are important to us. The things that matter to us are what make up our lives. Our bodies are important to us. When someone wounds our body or someone wounds our values, when someone hurts the very essence of who we are, it does not do anyone any good to say, it's okay. It doesn't matter. That wasn't important. Because when we do that, what we're saying fundamentally is, my values aren't important. My body doesn't matter. My life is not as important as making this situation smooth. That's just not honest. When we forgive, we have to acknowledge that someone has transgressed something that is integral to who we are, the God-made person that we are. When we forgive, it puts us in a conundrum, no? Because on the one hand, We want to move on. We want to put the poison down. We want to stop resenting. And on the other hand, we have to uphold our values. So how do we do that? Well, let's go back to our story of Joseph. Joseph cannot demand that his brothers did not throw him into a pit. But it wouldn't change anything. And no matter what he does to them in return, if he did the same thing, if he took every single one of his brothers, his 11 brothers, threw them into a pit and sold them into slavery, would it undo anything about his past? Retributive justice, an eye for an eye justice, doesn't really change anything. It doesn't solve anything. And if 10,000 stories about murder have told us anything, retributive justice doesn't heal the wound. So what are we going to do? We can prefer that the past would be different, and we can acknowledge that our pain was real. So what do we do next? Well, next thing we can do is say that forgiveness is not forgetting. Let's imagine that you are at the zoo, and you have the opportunity, for reasons I cannot begin to fathom, to pet a tiger. And let's imagine then that the tiger mauls your arm. Well, that's not great. So in the course of healing, in the course of recovering from this trauma, you realize that you need to do the work of forgiving the tiger. You need to let go of the past and forgive the tiger, which is good. But you would do well not to forget that the tiger mauled your arm, because the next time you're at the zoo, if you forget that the tiger mauled your arm, you might lose the other arm as well. Tiger is going to maul. When we forgive, it's not necessary that we forget what happened. But in the process of forgiveness, we can unhook the hurt, we can unhook the feelings when we remember. When we forgive, we can end the cycle of reliving the pain, of reliving the discomfort of the memory. And we can simply say, yes, that happened. We can also say, tigers are apt to maul. Some people are apt to say or do things that I find harmful. It is okay to remember and acknowledge. It is also okay not to trust tigers with your physical safety. It's okay not to trust tigers to do the same thing. Forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to hand you the same thing that you had before, which is the opportunity not to treat me as a food item, but to say, that's just who you are. Part of the process of forgiveness is acknowledging the truth of who other people are and what they are and are not capable of, what they are trustworthy with and what they are not trustworthy with. It's like if you hit my car because you're consistently not a great driver in the snow, or let me be more honest, if I hit your car because I'm consistently not a great driver in the snow, you can probably still trust me to make a great tray of brownies, which I do very well and regularly. And you can also trust me to be not a great driver in the snow. You can forgive me, I hope, for hitting your car. And we can all just avoid the red Toyota on the road when the weather gets like this. You can trust me to be who I am. The people in our lives that have hurt us in various ways, we can trust them to be who they are. And we can also acknowledge that there are other things that they might do really well. That they are not trustworthy in one area doesn't mean that we write them off as a whole person. I think that's what Jesus means when he says that God is kind even to the ungrateful and the wicked. And thank God for that, because sometimes the ungrateful and the wicked includes me. That forgiveness is for everybody. The key is to get to know people and trust them to be who they are, instead of hoping that they're who we want them to be. It's a big difference. People are going to be who they are, and we can allow them to do that. That's a big part of forgiveness. And fourth, forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Forgiveness is something that we can do independently of the person who offended us. We can forgive regardless of whether or not that person knows they're being forgiven, even if they are even alive. We can forgive because forgiveness is an act that we do for ourselves. I don't need to say, you don't need to say, Tuesday, is it okay if I forgive you that you smashed my car, right? You can forgive me independently. Similarly, I don't need to have a conversation with my parents and say, I forgive you for divorcing when I was 2 and causing all that hurt. Instead, I can say, in my own heart, they have my forgiveness. They were doing the best they could. And carry on. I can't change the past. I can forgive them regardless of their presence or not. Forgiveness is what we do. Because we are the primary beneficiaries of forgiveness. When we do this work of forgiveness, regardless of what the other person is doing, regardless of if they've changed their life or not, regardless if they're still mauling arms at the zoo or not, we're the ones who benefit. We're the ones who receive the fullness of life. I wonder if that's what Jesus is talking about when he says at the end of our reading that what you give will come back to you like grain in a basket, pressed down, shaken out to fill up every nook and cranny and running over so that when you take your apron to the market, it is completely full with the thing that you've given. If when we practice forgiveness, that we come back with so much more, what would your life feel like if all the resentment dissolved today? How different would it be? Reconciliation, then, just to put a point on that, is not a guarantee. And that's okay. Reconciliation is a choice. Jesus says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who is listening. It's a choice. Forgiveness is what we do. Reconciliation is about what we're going to do. Forgiveness is the past. Reconciliation is the future. And we cannot do reconciling work on our own. In order to reconcile with another person, both parties must make a commitment to a trusting future. And that may require amendment of life. That's the kind of churchy phrase that we talk about from time to time. It just means Tina turning yourself around, acknowledging where you are and what you've done, and deciding you want to do something different. If I've hurt someone in the past, and let me correct that by saying, I have hurt people in the past. And if I want to be in relationship with them after I've hurt them, I've got to take a hard look at myself and see, what do I need to do to change? Thank God I've got God to help. I can't do that on my own. And if I don't make those changes, it's probably not a good idea for people to be, those people that I've hurt, to be in relationship with me, no? Similarly, for the people that have hurt me, I can forgive them. And if they continue to do the thing that they're doing, the tiger mauling me in the arm, it's okay for me not to be in relationship with them. The good news is that God's love is so big that even the people who hurt me are covered by God's love. And even the people that I've hurt do not exclude me from God's love. Thanks be to God for that. So let's go back to our friend Joseph. In the beginning of his story, he had dreams of who he was and who he was going to be. And in the process of forgiving his brothers for what they've done, he was able to realize the fullness of who he is. He names the truth of what happened. I am your brother Joseph, the one that you put into a pit and sold into slavery. I'm naming the truth, and I'm saying I'm letting go of that because I want to be in relationship. And if you do the amendment of life part, we can be in relationship. And there's Joseph. He's done his piece. What happens next in some ways is not even consequential because he's done the thing that he needs to do. And the person that he needs to be, he can be. The person that he dreamed of being, he is. In a fullness and a richness that he couldn't even imagine as a younger man. That's the power of forgiveness. Jesus talks about forgiveness. He's not talking about something cheap or simple or easy. But he is talking about something that is achievable step by step. He's not talking about us becoming a doormat, becoming subject to somebody else's evil and desire, but rather that we can live with a past that we cannot change without carrying resentment in our hearts. God wants for each one of us to have the fullness and richness of life in him. When Jesus talks about forgiveness, he's opening the door for us to know that fullness. He knows how much it hurts to be in resentment, and is giving us a way to get out. Forgiveness is one of the keys to freedom, the keys to liberation, and the keys to a resurrection life.